All right. Today I want to talk to you about a question. This question is, what is Latin America? So let's do a little mental map exercise first. Take out a piece of paper. And on this piece of paper, I want you to draw a map of Latin America. Draw as many political boundaries as you can, add as many cities as you can, add as many naturally occurring landmarks as you can, rivers, mountains. Take a few minutes, right, to do this. Don't look at a map of Latin America because I want you to first think about it, right? What is the map, the mental map that you have in your head about Latin America? All right. So if we were together in class, what I would do is I would have one of you go up to a whiteboard or a chalkboard and then draw your map. And then we would sort of work together to try to figure out how to fill this map in. Does anyone want to add anything? Take anything away? Well, geographically speaking, this is Latin America. Latin America comprises the Spanish speaking Caribbean, the French speaking Haiti, Mexico, Central America, and the Spanish speaking countries of South America and Brazil. Interestingly, the other British and French islands of the Caribbean are not considered part of Latin America, or oftentimes not considered part of Latin America, even though geographically they fall within the region. Belize, which was a British colony, has been sort of grandfathered into Latin America. French Guiana and Guyana, which is also British, and Suriname, which is Dutch, are not really Latin America, but oftentimes no one really pays attention to them anyway because of their own sort of colonial history. Okay, now I want you to take a few minutes and ask yourself what unites this region, if anything. If we look at this region together, and you can see that there are a lot of exceptions to what makes Latin America, what unites, say, Mexico to Brazil more than Mexico to the United States? Or the Caribbean with Argentina more than with, say, Florida? Because actually, those two areas, there are more Mexicans in the United States than there are Mexicans in Brazil. And there are definitely more people from the Caribbean in Florida than in Argentina. So what unites Latin America? What makes Latin America Latin America? It's difficult, right? Because what do we leave in? What do we leave out? Let's start with the name itself, Latin America. The term Latin America only emerged actually in the mid 19th century. So when we're talking about pre-Columbian history, when we're talking about history before 1492, when we're talking about the colonial era, there was no Latin America as such. There was no Latin America as we defined it before the 1850s. The term emerged only in the aftermath of the Wars of Independence against colonial Spain, which took place from 1810 to 1825, and after the more or less peaceful transition of Brazil from colony to empire in the 1820s. The term itself was used first in print by a Colombian by the name of Jose Maria Caicedo in 1856. But it was quickly adopted by a European, and that European was the French leader Napoleon III. Why do you think that was the case? Why do you think Napoleon III in the 1850s thought that it would be a good idea to call this whole region Latin America? Well, because it was used as justification for the imperial motivations of Napoleon III. The French invaded Mexico in the 1860s and even set up a 5-year monarchy under an Austrian emperor named Maximilian. So why would the term Latin America be used as a justification for a colonial enterprise? Well, Latin in Latin America refers to the Latin or Romance languages on which it was based, right? So Spanish and Portuguese and French, right? These were all Latin Romance languages. Thus, it was a way to justify a kind of cultural, linguistic link between the French in Europe and the countries of Mexico, Central and South America, who spoke Spanish, right? So France was not the original colonial power over Mexico, but here is a way that connects the French to the Mexicans, right? That we speak a Latin Romance language. The French were trying to create a cultural link based on language to further justify their imperial project. So the term Latin America was constructed based on imperial designs. And so if the term Latin America doesn't really exist until the 1850s, what united this place that would become Latin America? Well, one scholar, a scholar from Vanderbilt by the name of Marshall Eakin, has suggested that there might be some ways to think about connecting this region. I believe that there are two important characteristics or threads that tie this region together. Although these threads should be seen as tying the region together very loosely, they are European conquest and colonization. A definition given by Marshall Eakin says it succinctly, right, from the article that I have you reading. Quote, the region and the peoples arose out of the process of conquest and colonization by European powers, primarily the Spanish and Portuguese. These processes of conquest and colonization, the complex struggles between conqueror and colonized, are at the very essence of any definition of Latin American history. So let's look at this first term, this first idea of conquest. When we talk about conquest, we do not mean to say that it's a unilinear process, right? Sure, the Spanish and Portuguese violently entered onto the scene in the early 1500s in Latin America, no doubt. But the process of conquest was actually a give and take relationship. Since the 1960s, for instance, scholars have emphasized the resistance and agency of non-Europeans to European colonization and conquest, and the creation of new cultural expressions. And so, in some ways, this kind of relationship between the conquest and those that were conquered, right, the conquerors and the conquered, should be seen as a kind of give and take process. It's not a one direction only. Although Europe sought to recreate itself in the New World, in the end, what arose was not European and not wholly indigenous, and very much influenced by Africa as well. One of the words that we'll use in this class is the notion that John Chastain talks about in his book, Born in Blood and Fire, transculturation, a kind of mixing and blending of two different cultures together, right? The second idea, colonization, in terms of colonization, we might add that three main peoples took part: European, indigenous, and African. And there was a blending, a mixing, and a forming of something new, as I said. It was a Columbian moment in October 1492 that there was this coming together, the world restored, bringing back into contact peoples that had lost touch with one another for thousands of years, the Eastern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere. And so these common processes, conquest and colonization, are at the root of Latin American, any definition of Latin America. But also the flip side of these, resistance and accommodation, right? Resistance, agency, not just conquest and colonization. And so we begin on this journey. I want you to pay special attention to the agency of everyday Latin Americans in trying to create their own Latin America, right? Enough of the sort of colonial definitions of Europe trying to give definition to what Latin America is. The best way to find out the question of what is Latin America is to let those Latin Americans speak for themselves.